Greetings, everyone, and I am so sorry for the technical difficulties. Murphy's Law, when it happens, you never know what's going to happen. But I thank everybody for their patience, and you'll be hearing this ding ding throughout. This is the largest crowd that we've ever received for the Dr. Consuela Francis Reading Circle. So I am definitely multitasking here. But yes.
Maximize, make it bigger, maximize the just. No, that made it a little bigger, filled up a little bit more of the screen. You can still see.
Okay, all right. We will begin. Greetings and welcome, everyone, to a special edition of the Dr. Consuela Francis Reading Circle. Tonight, we are hosting the author of the New York Times bestseller, Master Slave, Husband Wife, Ilyon Wu, virtually, and 3 of the Kraft family descendants at Avery. Ms. Julia Ellen Davis, if you could raise your hand, please. Ms. Gail DeCosta and Ms. Vicki Davis Williams. And I know that I am off screen, and I think that's fine. But anyway, I am Georgette Mayo, archivist at the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture at the College of Charleston, which is just 5 short blocks away. I will be your moderator for tonight's discussion as we delve into the lives of William and Ellen Kraft through Dr. Wu's book, along with family stories and viewing some of the archival materials they donated. If you're familiar with the Avery Research Center, we are an archival repository, small museum, and cultural center for public programming. Tonight, either virtually or in person, you are experiencing the best of all 3 aspects of Avery. Our home was formerly known as the Avery Normal Institute, a school opened during Reconstruction for the education of African Americans, closing in the mid-1950s. For our new attendees to the Dr. Consuela Francis Reading Circle, I would like to tell you a little bit about our name. Our circle is named after the former College of Charleston English professor who established the African American Studies program as a major field of study at the college. Dr. Francis created a book club entitled Dark After Dark at the John L. Library on King Street. She passed away in 2016, and we meaning Miss Rambo and myself, excuse me. Stand closer to the mic. Okay, can I be heard now?
Yes.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. Okay, thank you. I moved away from the mic, but and I'm sorry. I thought my voice would carry. I'm talking about Dr. Consuela Francis and the inception of our reading circle. Dr. Consuela Francis passed away suddenly in 2016, and we renamed the reading circle in her honor and memory. As readers, we discuss Black literature, fiction and nonfiction, classics and new works. We normally meet on the 3rd Thursday of the month. Keeping in Avery's theme for February, Love at Avery, we will discuss The Davenports by Crystal Marquez on February the 15th via Zoom, 6:30 to 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. I'm pausing because I'm letting people in. Okay. I want to mention my partner in books, the Miss Ruth Rambo. We have missed you and so happy you are present and on the road to recovery. It was Ms. Rambo who suggested this book, first to ASALA, which is the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Shortly thereafter, Dr. Wu emailed us for a photo request. Fortunately, she accepted our offer to join us in discussing her book. Naturally, we had to include the Kraft family, who graciously donated their family's collection to Avery. We welcomed the attendees from the Charleston branch of ASALA and the Liz Austin Justice and Reconciliation book group, among many, many others. I think, I don't know if anybody has heard, I think I mentioned it with this crowd that's at Avery, but this is the largest group that we've ever had for the Dr. Conseula Francis Reading Circle. So this is very heartwarming. And we hope that you will join us again in the near future. Now, if you are new to the William and Ellen Craft story or have not read the book yet, and y'all should, because it's an excellent book, and I'm not just saying that because of Dr. Wu being present, but is a captivating read, and it's a true life story. I have brief cliff notes for you from the Craft and Crum Family Papers Finding Aid abstract. William Craft and Ellen Smith Craft were slaves who met on a plantation in Macon, Georgia. Unwilling to raise children in slavery in December 1848, they devised a plan to escape to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Ellen dressed as an invalid male, her arm in a sling to avoid riding. Neither William nor Ellen could read or write, and face in bandages to obscure her feminine voice and lack of facial hair. William accompanied her as a servant. They arrived in Philadelphia on Christmas Day, where they were welcomed and assisted by a well-known abolitionist, then lived in Boston, Massachusetts until 1850, until the Fugitive Slave Act was passed. Pursued by bounty hunters, they fled to England, where they settled and had 5 children. In 1868, the Crafts returned to the United States, and in 1870, they purchased Woodville Plantation in Bryan County, Georgia, and they opened up Woodland Cooperative Farm School to educate newly freed slaves. Within a decade, the school closed for lack of funding, and in 1890, the Crafts moved to Charleston, South Carolina to live with their daughter Ellen Craft Crum, until their deaths. And finally, I take the great pleasure and honor to introduce you to Ilyon Wu, first by reading her bio found on her website. Ilyon Wu is the New York Times best-selling author of Master Slave, Husband and Wife, an epic journey from slavery to freedom, one of the New York Times 10 best books of 2023. What an honor. And People's Magazine's top 10 books for 2023, also named a best book of the year by the New Yorker, Time, NPR, Smithsonian Magazine, Boston, Chicago Public Library, and Oprah Daily. Time Magazine called Master Slave, Husband, Wife an edge of your seat drama. The Wall Street Journal pronounced it a narrative of such courage and resourcefulness, it seems too dashing to be true. A genuine nail biter. A finalist for the Curtis Prize. The book was long listed for a Carnegie Medal, nominated for the Goodreads Choice Awards, and supporting by a Whiting Creative Nonfiction Writing Grant. Ilyon is also the author of The Great Divorce, a 19th century mother's extraordinary fight against her husband, the Shakers, and her times. Her writing has appeared in the Boston Globe, the Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine, the New York Times, and she has received support for her research from the National Endowment for the Humanities and the American Equestrian Society, among other institutions. Ilyon has traveled the country to speak at bookstores, museums, schools, book festivals, and she has been featured on such programs as NPR's Morning Edition, All Things Considered, CBS Sunday Morning. She holds a BA in the humanities from Yale College and a PhD in English from Columbia University, where she first came upon the story of William and Ellen Craft. I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Ilyon Wu.
Thank you so much for that introduction and for having me here today. It's really a pleasure to be in conversation with you all, and especially with the amazing Craft descendants. I'm actually wondering, I see a lot of faces on the Zoom screen. I'm wondering if it's possible, I'm not able to, I see that Miss Julia Ellen and Miss Gail and Miss Vicky from the side, but I can't see their faces, and I don't see you, Georgette, either. Oh, are you so you're looking at a screen in the other direction? Okay.
I will make myself present for a brief second.
Oh, hello. It's good to see you. It's wonderful to see you.
I'm good at nurturing things. Ilyon. Is that correct?
Yes.
Back to the text. So being an archivist, I'm going to ask some brief questions in regards to with an archivist, Ben, because I'm always curious, you know, when we had communicated, I don't know if everybody knows the story about how you came across William and Ellen Craft outside of what you wrote in your bio.
Mm-hmm.
But I consider that admittedly, archives do not provide complete stories of one's life, but does provide clues for further interrogation. How did the Crafts material culture / artifacts, you call it either or, inform your research?
Well, that's a wonderful question. And I want to first start by acknowledging and noting the Crafts' remarkable 1860 narrative that makes all of the storytelling possible. I mean, I think one of the things that has impressed me the most, the deeper I've gone into their story, is understanding not only did they pull off this incredible escape, but then they were equally incredibly courageous in making it public and telling their story for their loved ones, for all those left in bondage. And they did this again and again. They first were on the abolitionist lecture circuit, putting themselves in huge danger by doing this. I mean, really putting markers on their backs. And then later on, they wrote their story. And it's because they've written their story, and it's because their descendants who are here with us today have preserved their history and their legacy that we can study it now. So when I first came across that narrative, I mean, it kind of gives me chills when I recall that moment, because I know where I was sitting in this library at Columbia, and it was dark and it was evening. And I remember just the the look of that page. At that point, there was not, I have relied a lot on this, the Dr. Barbara McCaskill's edition, scholarly edition of Running 1,000 Miles to Freedom. But that at that time, there weren't readily available copies of the narrative. So this was a photocopy I was reading, but it really felt like a whoosh, like straight into the 19th century. And, reading their really moving words about their journey, but also the losses and the loves that propelled their journey, both originating in their family experience and with the love that they had in each other. This was a narrative that felt incredibly propulsive to me. In many ways, this book was a dream to write, easy to write, because it really kind of built around this incredible narrative that they have. That said, so the narrative tells the story in about 60 pages, and there's a lot of great, wonderful detail in there that's pretty unusual for the genre, but there's a lot that also is left out. I think some of this is a matter of safety, because they needed to protect the loved ones that they were leaving behind who are still in bondage. Some of it is a matter of, time. They were writing to a contemporary audience that didn't need to have a lot, certain details that are unfamiliar to us now. They didn't need to have those explained to them. So it in itself is an archival document. It's a piece of history. And what your amazing collections do, thanks to the generosity of the craft descendants in sharing these incredibly rich materials, is it enables us to build around this narrative with all kinds of different artifacts, which I hope that you'll share some of these today so we can look at them again on the screen, which make it possible for us to newly enter into that world beyond what the crafts provide in their narrative. So one example is, it's one thing to be told that William Craft was a skilled cabinet maker, or that Ellen Craft was a talented seamstress. But then when you can actually go to your collections, as I did, and see this exquisite jewelry box that William Craft made with his hands, and study all the joints there, and see the gloss and the finish, and to open it up and see the key right next to it. I mean, it's an extraordinary experience that really connects you to these amazing artists and people.
See this? See the side of their face. You have a mic?
Yeah, just put your gloves on, and we're having a live demonstration.
Oh,
This is Miss Julia Ellen Craft.
She needs a mic. She needs a mic.
Oh, wait, here.
Had been in our house.
I'm gonna follow you.
So this is the jewelry box that we believe William Craft made. And it had been for many years at our home with our grandmother's home. And then we donated it here to Avery. So here's a detail. There's a lot of detail in this box. It's beautiful. So I'll walk so that people on the Zoom audience can see it. Well, open up the box. What?
Let me hold the box. Okay.
So we can't go so far. Okay, so this is Vicki Williams, my sister, and I'm Julia Ellen Davis. So we're sisters. So the inside has decayed, but there's a little bit of stuff in here that was put in there by a family member, not William Craft. This is.
But they're the
This is
mother and
that Jack and Jill. So there's stuff in there that's not related, but it's like Jack and Jill, and some other papers. So that's that's the, okay,
I wonder if you could share with us the experience of growing up with that box, or how your memories of that box, or any stories that might have been told around it. Do you know who he made the box for, or anything more about any more details about how it was used?
well, because we were able to give it to Avery, that box was made by William Kraft, and it was probably in the family. That's why the family was able to pass it down generation to generation. Yeah, our grandmother did not tell us anything more about the box. We just know that it's been in the home for generations, and it's a box that we believe was made by William Kraft, who made a lot of cabinets. So this was something that was easy for him to do. Ilyon, we also have here, if you mentioned it, is the photo album and the tribute book, as well as the deed to the farm in Bryan County.
Well,
If you mention it, yeah.
In regards to the photograph book, would you like to mention some of the people that are in the photograph book?
Yeah, yes. We need a cameraman. Or maybe I can use my sister again. But actually, if you could hold this, because I. Do what? This is a photo album that was passed down, was maintained by our grandmother, who was Julia Ellen Kraft DeCosta. And it was in our home. I enjoy looking at this, but my sister was very good in encouraging me to give it to Avery. So we didn't want anything to happen to it. That's what made me say, okay, maybe we ought to let it go. But there's a picture. Can they see the picture?
No, the camera's there. You have to turn it around.
But if you can, if it's
Is it too far?
labeled with a
Tell the
name,
names.
if you can mention at least the name.
The picture
Come
here, the picture here is a picture of Ellen Kraft, the daughter. In our family, females also get names passed down to that next generation. So this is a picture of Ellen Kraft, who married Dr. Crum. So this was one of the 5 children who lived to be an adult that Ellen and William had. And she's, okay, does that help you? So yeah, she was married to Dr. William Crum.
I just
That's-
I put the album in the chat box, a link to it, so you can actually look at it online digitally.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we don't need to sweat this too much because it really is available online. Thank you.
For everyone, but maybe some of it, like, isn't,
Ira Aldrich, he's an actor, a really well-known actor at the time in Europe, and he was here. And then also this picture here is a picture of, actually, this is a family. This is a woman who was the sister of Emmeline Kinlaw, who was our mother's sister. So I don't know if we want to keep on going, but here's a picture of Ellen Kraft in her outfit that she used to escape. And so this is the top hat that she was able to wear. She passed as a wealthy gentleman. And so her arm was in a sling, and she had men's clothing and also a shirt and the pants.
Now, I do have a question about that
Mhm.
actual image.
What's the
Hi.
question?
I would put you on the spot. Is that an original? Because the New York Times article had Library of Congress when they used it. So did it originally come from that photo
This-
album, or is it?
The original probably is in England, because this this was taken. Well, Ilya, maybe you can help us with this. You're asking if the picture we have in the photo album is the original. And I don't believe it's the original because, but the picture was the question is, was it taken in Boston or was it taken in England? That wherever it was first taken is where the original would have been.
Yep, the picture, the daguerreotype, that original image was made right before William Wells Brown went off to the UK. This is when the Crafts, they made all these repeatedly brave decisions. At one point, William Wells Brown, who they'd been lecturing with, was like, hey, let's go to Europe. I've gotten an invitation to go to Paris. Why don't we go speak there? And they decided they were going to settle in Boston. But right before he went, they had Ellen's picture made, the daguerreotype. As far as I know, the original daguerreotype image doesn't exist, but there was an engraving made off that, and that was made into these little cards and passed around, and lots of people have them. I mean, there's one at Harvard, they're in a lot of different locations, and including actually in the 1860 narrative. But the daguerreotype image that really looks like a photograph, I haven't seen that anywhere. The other interesting thing that I learned about that image during my research was from a Quaker family that the Crafts were really close with, who they had stayed with secretly in Pennsylvania soon after they escaped. So I originally thought, I mean, the assumption has been, I think all this time, that that outfit that you see in the daguerreotype or in that engraving was the original outfit. But what these Quakers descendants have let us know is that actually Ellen was sort of terrified about being caught with these clothing items. So she actually abandoned the original costume, leaving the boots, a very expensive pair of spurred boots with the Quaker son. That was the last thing that she left behind. So the clothing that we see in that image is actually not the original clothing.
Yeah.
Thank you. And you're helping other researchers, present and future researchers who look at the tribute book, the photograph book. No, it's the tribute book and the photograph book are two separate things. So we're looking right now at the photograph book. I do have another question. Ira Aldrich. I don't think that he was mentioned in the book, but he was a friend of the Crafts. He was a Shakespearean actor, a Black Shakespearean actor, and quite notable. And he is featured in the photograph book.
Yeah, I think you can read about their connection. I think that the best source I know on that off the top of my head is called Performing Anti-Slavery by Gail Chima, and she writes about their interaction in the UK and how the Crafts actually attend a performance of his.
Okay, great. Well, for the Crafts, oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Ilyon, you were getting ready to say something?
Oh, I was gonna ask Ms. Julia Ellen if she wanted to talk at all about sort of the mystery picture that we went back and forth a lot with, that actually is now in the paperback. It wasn't included in the original hardcover book, but there's a new image that we're including here that Mary Trent identified first as being a picture of Ellen Craft that was sort of hiding in plain sight.
Are you talking about the little boy at the desk?
No, I'm talking about the group photo. So there's an exquisite group photo in the photo album, and I have it in the paperback here.
Yeah.
It's this one. So
I remember.
I remember seeing this image because they're so beautiful. Like look at the clothes that they're wearing. I mean, they're really spectacularly dressed, and my eye was sort of on the woman in the foreground. But then there's a scholar, I think is she at Charleston now, who wrote a wonderful article about the whole photo album and interviewed Miss Julia Ellen and Miss did she interview multiple members of the family, and she asserted that this woman here was actually Ellen Craft.
Go this one. It's interesting because I don't remember it being in the photo album book, but we're looking for it now. Also, the people at least can, that are here can see it. But we have a, well, I don't know what we call the group in England, but we have a group that does a lot of research. And so sometimes the discussions have included us and sometimes maybe not. But the point is that there was a discussion about whether or not the lady in the front was Ellen, a picture of Ellen. And also, I think, were they thinking how her daughter was in there also? But it's a picture that has people of that time, and how they're dressed. So we're showing it to the people that are here, and maybe we can find a way to show it to you guys. It is in there? Okay, great. Yeah, we just had to find it, that's all.
I think it's page 26 in the digital, if memory serves correctly.
We got it. They found it. It's just kind of dark, so it's hard for people to see. Okay, so we encourage those of you online and those that are here to go online, because this photo album is there and you can see everything we're showing you, you can see in a lot more detail online.
My colleague, Aisha Heikel, I'm going to call her name out. She did drop a link in regards to access to the Low Country Digital Library, where the Craft Crumb family papers are digitized. And the beauty of the Low Country Digital Library is that it's not behind a firewall, or you don't need a special code. You just need to just go to Low Country Digital Library. And I try to do it, in fact, today or yesterday, well, it doesn't matter, within the last couple of days. And I try to put in the whole title, and it didn't search. It says it couldn't find. So just put craft in. That's just a handy hint. Moving right along. Oh, I'm sorry. Moving right along. I do have a question for the Craft family. I'm going to call you the Craft family. Knowing your family's history, is there any aspect of Wu's book that was new to you?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, yes. Well, I'll speak for myself, but probably others as well. We learned a great deal from Ilyon's book. We knew the basic story because, as Ilyon said, William and Ellen wrote a book about, and there have been articles and other books also over the years have been written about them. But Ilyon's book went into so much more detail. It was so well researched. We just learned a lot about the context in which they lived, and explanations for why they may have done certain things, not done things. We were spurred to go to Macon and to Clinton, Georgia, where I guess it was Ellen lived in Clinton originally. Yeah. And so, yeah, there was just, there were many things that we learned about the context in which a lot of these things happened.
So I just want to add, in addition to what Gail was saying, we did not realize that Ellen, when she was a slave to to her half sister, and so the Collins, that they went to Charleston for several years. So they left Macon. So we're not quite sure how old I think Ellen was, but let's say she was preteen or teenager. And so they spent some time, a limited amount of time in Charleston, And the area was near, what I gathered was around Meeting Street and Cumming and Broad, around that area. So when Ellen and William got off the, I guess, the steamship from Macon, from Savannah actually, to Charleston, she was able to find her way to the custom house or the place where you get tickets. Because I always wondered, Ellen and William did not know how to read or write. So how did they get from point A to point B in, because originally they bought tickets straight to Philadelphia. But when they got to Charleston, they found out that in the winter, they had to find other, means of transportation so that they could not take the train all of the way. So they had to take a combination steamship and coach. But the fact that she was in Charleston as a young person that was new to us.
And I'll hand it over, because one of the things, their stories that they wrote started with right before the escape. But what Ilyon did was go way back. So that's how we learned a lot of more of the history of their growing up, and including that detail that we had never known, that they had lived for a couple of years right here in Charleston.
Yeah, I really appreciated the time that Ilyon put into the book regarding William Craft. It's one thing to research Ellen, because we knew who her father was, the plantation owner, and we kind of knew the mother, Maria, but what we didn't know anything about William's people. And I had gone to the Slave Dwelling Project conference several years ago, and they had me, and I was one of the speakers. And at the end of it, this lady came up to me and she says, "I'm from someplace down south, maybe Alabama, and I believe I'm related to William Craft." And so it's the kind of thing where, I wasn't able to really converse about it because we were both rushing. But I wish I had, I didn't know for sure she was accurate, but I wish now that I had gotten more information from her, because now we know that William had siblings, and it was really great to know that, and to find out more about the family. So we thank you for all of your time and your research. We just, you're like a part of the Craft family. How's that?
Oh, it's an honor and it's a pleasure. I actually wonder if maybe I should talk a little bit about how I found those two particular pieces of information, because maybe it'll be useful for other people who are doing research into their families or related stories, because those were two like huge eureka moments for me. Both the Charleston discovery, the discovery that Ellen had lived in Charleston, and William's family, and I remember vividly how that happened.
Yeah.
With that, so in terms of,
I can't hear her.
oh,
Yes, go
can you
ahead.
hear me? Okay, am I audible? Okay, so in terms of Ellen being in Charleston, the source for that actually, I had been having something was weird with the census records that I was looking at to begin with around 1840, because I was looking at Robert Collins. So Ellen Craft was enslaved by her half-sister, Eliza Collins, and Eliza Collins's husband was Robert Collins. And oftentimes, I mean, Georgette, you asked this question at the beginning about how can we use the archives? What do archival materials provide that, how can we sort of squeeze those? What do they leave out? And the fact of the matter is, a lot of these historical records were kept by the enslavers and not by the enslaved. There's a whole huge reason for that. I mean, the enslaved were denied literacy, so they couldn't preserve these kinds of things in writing in the same kind of way. And that was very purposeful. But in terms of so when we're doing a lot of this research, we have to look at the slavers' records to get to the people that they were enslaved, because in many cases, there are no other records that exist. So what I was looking at very carefully was the Smith family records, the Collins's records, and I came across detailed records kept by a woman named Eliza Cleveland Smith. So she is Ellen Craft's biological father's wife. And she comes up in the first page of the narrative because she made Ellen and Ellen's mother's life miserable. And she was the one who was responsible for separating mother and daughter and for having Ellen Craft given away as a wedding present to Eliza Smith Collins when on her wedding day. So this Mistress Smith, who is really they call her a tyrannical old woman. And the Crafts generally, they sort of, they don't speak badly about a lot of people in their book, but they really come down hard on Mistress Smith. But it's actually Mistress Smith's records, her family records, that reveal to me this Charleston connection. Because when you look at Mistress Smith's lineage, it's all really carefully preserved. And you have all the Cleveland family descendants. They're actually related to the president too, Grover Cleveland. So I'm looking at this Cleveland family genealogy, and it documents Mistress Smith's children, and which includes Eliza Smith Collins and Eliza Smith Collins' children. I'm getting to the sort of the eureka moment now. Eliza Smith Collins' daughter, Juliet, was born, it said, in Charleston in the early 1840s. And that is where like sort of a light bulb went off for me, because I was like, wait a second. If she was born in Charleston, then was the whole family in Charleston? And if the whole family was in Charleston, Ellen, being the favored lady's maid and slave lady's maid, she must have been there too. And then I started looking for Robert Collins and evidence of his business. And, there had been one thing that been bothering me, that I'd seen Robert Collins in the 1830 census and the 1850 census in Macon, but there was no record of him being in Macon in 1840. And I was like, is it possible that he was in Charleston? I look at the 1840 census for Charleston, and Robert Collins is there. So that was the first bit of evidence that I was like, they were there, and Ellen must have been there too. So it's a combination of census records, enslavers' records, but also sort of looking sideways at the enslavers' records, at not only the people directly involved, but I do actually like to look a lot at when people were born, who was pregnant when. And that's actually tied to another whole discovery that we spoke about, and that was added to the paperback edition of this book, having to do with a baby, another Craft baby.
Now, when is the paperback coming out?
The paperback just came out this week, so I think it was on Tuesday. Yep. And actually, Ms. Julia Ellen and Ms. Gail and Ms. Vicky, I have like a stack of books that I have to mail to you, but this is what it looks like. So this will have the new picture of
Someone has it here.
This will have the new photo and the new information that the Craft descendants shared with me about there being another lost Craft child who was born to the Crafts after in the later part of their lives, and that reveals a whole much more too about Ellen Craft's relationship with her mother and new things in the new book.
How long did it take you to write this book?
Oh gosh, I first came across the Crafts narrative in the 1990s. That's really when I was sort of starting to think about it. I started trying doing a little bit of investigation and around, this is a long, boring answer to a pretty simple question, but I'll say probably about 7 years.
Thank you, because the detail that you go into, it's amazing. You really did do excellent research on this, so.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Williams. Do you have the mic? Okay, you have the mic.
I do.
Go ahead.
Ilyon, I have a question. I actually was going to email you tomorrow and ask the question, but I'm gonna ask it on live Zoom.
Great.
And that is, when I read your book, I saw that it said that Ellen and William arrived in Philadelphia on Christmas Eve.
Mhm.
I always thought, and after reading the book, the actual book that William and Ellen wrote, I always thought that they arrived in Philadelphia on Christmas Day. And that's the story I've been telling. So Gail and I were talking earlier, and I think Gail reminded me, I think we had a discussion about this not too long ago, maybe when you were in Charleston, but maybe you can share, I guess, through your research, why the information in your book is a little different.
Sure. Well, yes, you're right. The Crafts say in their narrative that that they arrived on Christmas Day, and I think actually it was closed. It was Christmas Eve, and I'm now looking at my notes so I can tell you exactly when. So if you actually look on page 348, note 7, that will give you that will give you some of the detail. But in a nutshell, it's this: they say they arrive on Christmas Day. And they say they arrive on a Sunday, but they also say they leave on a Wednesday. And you can't have it both ways, because Sunday in that year in 1848 was December 24th. So it has to be one or the other. And when I looked at, and also I was looking at, one of the things that I did, I got like really obsessive about the travel details, because I kind of it just seemed like they were jumping around so much. And I wanted to know if there was any sort of like schedule or anything that could sort of give us more insight into how they made these transitions. And would you know it, there are these incredible schedule books. So I got my hands on these like amazing old, like, travel logs and like guidebooks. I mean, and these like pocket guidebooks that tell you exactly where you can change from one place to the next and give you timetables and stuff like that. So when I looked at all that, and I looked at the schedule, I thought, I realized it had to have happened in like 4.5 days, and it couldn't be Wednesday through, it couldn't be the dates that they gave. It had to be one or the other. And when you look at the earliest accounts, they talk about having left on a Wednesday. And there are other ways in which I looked at the scheduling and decided that that it only made sense logically if they had arrived on Christmas Eve and not Christmas Day. But they arrived
Morning or in the evening?
in the morning.
In the morning on Christmas Eve.
And yeah, there's a line when they're arriving in Philadelphia, and it's in the earliest hours of the morning, and William opens a window and he hears somebody saying, look out, old horse, we're in Philadelphia. And I remember thinking, that's a really weird line, old horse. I thought maybe that's just like slang for like guy or something like that, somebody talking to his friend. But actually, this obsessive travel research made me just led me to the understanding that it's actually horses that pull the train into the city of Philadelphia. There were fire hazards at that time. You didn't want to have the big coal cars moving with the engines. So at that time, they would like take the trains off the engines and put them onto horses. So that last stretch would be horses. So the person who was saying, "Look out, old horse," or "Hurry up, old horse," might have actually been talking to an old horse.
I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions. And I will first take our participants on Zoom. And I'm going in the order that I received them. It says, Dr. Wu has done a tremendous job telling an expansive story, given everything we know and can surmise about the crafts using available documentation. I'm curious whether she or other scholars have a point of view on whether details of their lives in the UK, Hickory Hill, and Woodville would emerge in greater detail over time. That is, have scholars focused on the 1848 to 1850 years, because that's what tracks the craft's own narrative.
Mm. That's a great question. I mean, I think there's still so much more research to be done. I personally focused on 1848 to 1852 because I really wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of those times. Like, I wanted to be able to be with the horses, you know, and to see what it smelled like and tasted like to be in that era on the train. And there's no way I could have sustained that level of detail through the late 1800s, because William passes away in 1900. So I kind of made a choice that I'd rather really sort of focus on their freedom journey. But there is, I mean, in terms of what the crafts experienced in Bryan County, in terms of what they experienced in the UK, there is much more there too. Africa, I know that Miss Julia Ellen was doing some research there, and so I hope that there will be further investigation both with the family and with the larger scholarly community.
Okay, thank you. The next question, I'm curious as to why photos of other people outside their family and outside the narrative appear in the photo album. Example, Harriet Beecher Stowe, the Princess of Wales, Abraham Lincoln, etc.
Those are people who the crafts met on their journey. You know, back then it's kind of like you'd be traveling, and instead of taking a selfie with people you'd meet, you'd exchange these cards. So they have records of different people that they've met or were interested in. And actually, Mary Trent's scholarship is really wonderful. That article that I think should be in the chat box. It really beautifully talks about how Ellen Craft documents and kind of makes her community come alive through this photo album. That a lot of times that these things might have been used for sort of business or detailing more professional relationships, but she is able to weave together both familial and these relationships that she's formed through travel. She builds this community through this photo album, and the way Dr. Trent analyzes it, I think, is really beautiful and a great tribute to the crafts.
Okay, I'm going to read one more from the Zoom chat. If anybody else has questions for that's on Zoom, please put it in. I'll swing back around to you. After this comment, I'm going to go into the audience and ask if there's any questions there. I read the hardcover, but you're saying I need to read the paperback too? Can't wait. That's a good comment.
Yeah, that's a great comment. I think so. Substance-wise, it's not radically altered, but I was really moved by this discovery personally, that the Craft descendants shared with me about another Craft child, and the way the timing of that interacts with Ellen Craft's life. So that is an important addition, I think, and I also love that photograph, which you could see in the photo album.
Might need their mic.
Thank you. Thank you. You have a question? I thought somebody had a question. I thought you said. I'm going to give the mic to the Miss Ruth Rambo.
It's not exactly a question. I just wanted to comment. I just wanted to comment on the little pieces of information that you gave us about people who were tangential. For example, for me, Calhoun, the pieces that you quoted from him and from his point of view. And I had not been exposed to that. So I was very excited to know things about not only him, but the Quakers that Ellen didn't trust and why she didn't trust them. And there were insights into it that were just profound. And I guess if there is a question I want to ask, it is, how in the world did you capture the terror of their flight? Where did that come from? Was that have you ever been that terrified yourself personally? Because you sure made me scared.
You know, I guess the crafts evoke these emotions so powerfully in their own works. And when you also, so at any time there was really a direct, when I said, you know, for example, William thought his heart was in his throat when they're in Baltimore, where they were at a critical juncture, it's because he actually described it that way in the narrative. So I never presume to know or to be able to tell you how they're feeling unless there's documentation for it. But what I did try to do, because I think, you know, in this Higher Wire Act, we don't see everything that's in that abyss below the tightrope. And they are at every possible moment, they're traveling above, you know, unspeakable, terrible possibilities. And so that's what I tried to do, is to juxtapose the choices that they're making and how they're moving so calmly against what could happen at any particular moment, or what has happened in spaces, or what is happening right next door. And I think when you see that, when you see them against the backdrop of everything that's possible and everything that's contemporary, for me, that made the heroism stand out all the more. And maybe that translates, I think, to a greater feeling of terror on the part of us, we who are witnesses to this, seeing all that they had to lose and these enormous stakes they had in making the brave choices that they did. But thank you for your comments.
Question over here? Somebody had a question?
This may not be directly related to the story, but does DNA add to the research toolbox for you?
Well, it hasn't for me, but maybe I'll pass that on to the craft descendants. I don't know if you've had DNA testing or if that's something that's of interest, but I know Finding Your Roots, I love watching Finding Your Roots, and I know that they use, they've made all kinds of different discoveries using DNA testing there and in other cases.
Anybody else with a question in the audience?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad that I bought the new copy today because I was in Atlanta the last couple of weeks and I left my original hard copy, which I was hoping to get signed. So it's in Atlanta, but I was able to buy the book at Barnes & Noble today. So I'm glad to have this so I can compare and contrast. But my comment goes back to the Christmas Eve, Christmas Day story. And the archival records do show that many escapes were made by the enslaved population on Christmas or around Christmas or around holidays.
Mm-hmm.
And in the documentation of the more aristocratic families, always tell stories about their Christmas experience because they are at their best, they're dressed, they're photographed, they're documented, and they are showing their better faces. So I'm sure the crafts were showing their better face and they were just ignored because they looked like everybody else going about. But when they found out in the passage of time that they were missing slaves on Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, which was Boxing Day, going into the new year after watch night, they decided to allow the enslaved population to drink freely because if they were drunk, they would not run. And I only know that because I interpret public history at the Middleton plantation where my ancestors were descendants there. So
Yes, I mean, Christmas time was it was the right time to ask. I think actually Ellen Craft asked Eliza Collins, her half sister and slaver, whether she could have those days to visit a sick relative, possibly a sick aunt. And originally Eliza Collins says no, because she doesn't feel like she can spare Ellen. But then Ellen sort of summons everything that she has and bursts into tears at that moment. And finally, Eliza Collins is persuaded. But they do this strategically, knowing that this is more of a likely time when enslavers will give passes to their favored slaves, and that there might be sort of a relaxation of certain kinds of rules. But it's also a terrible time because usually it's right after these holidays around the new year where if there are debts to be settled, there are reckonings and there's sales of enslaved people, which adds to the terror.
I have a question, Ilyon Wu. Since this is such an amazing story, has anyone thought about making it into a movie?
Maybe that's also one to ask the Craft descendants.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that is something that is being worked on. We know we have one of our cousins who's out in California who's very involved in a production that will probably come out, sooner than later. A second project, but I don't know exactly where they are on that, but I think the one in California is a little bit further ahead. But Variety magazine did announce the actor and actress for Ellen and William Craft in that second movie production. So, it's something that's in the works, and everyone, I tell you, every time someone hears this story, that's the question they always ask. So it's going to happen. We just have to, hope it. I think because they did have a strike, a writer's strike, that did slow up a lot. Yeah. So that hopefully will be something coming out soon to let us know where we are.
There is a dramatization that was made. I can't remember which year, but it's several decades old. And Miss Peggy Trotter Damond Priestley's mother, actually, I think she narrates that, right? She introduces the film.
This was such a popular question in the chat. I think 3 people asked the same question in different configurations, so. I do have a question. Well, not really a question, it's more so a comment that the New York Times article highlighted in regards to you giving Ellen a voice in the narrative. Now, I neglected to say, and I neglected to pull out, but we do have the first edition of Running 1,000 Miles to Freedom. So, do you want to? No, here, go on.
We have here the Avery has referred to it as a tribute album. I call it the autograph album, which is, I guess, today's term. So we have it here to show everybody. If we can just take a minute to do that. That's also online. Y'all. That's right. Thank you.
proper archival treatment in regards to handling very delicate items from the 19th century is utilizing gloves. And our director, our executive director, Dr. Tamara Butler, has pulled up our Low Country Digital Library, which features the William and Ellen Smith Craft photo book, among other items. Yes. The only qualm that I have about this platform, love the platform, but it's not in any kind of order. So you'll have a good time scrolling to find what you are looking for and possibly come up with discoveries in the meantime, but it's not in a form as we, as archivists, create a finding aid, we put it in some kind of order so it will help researchers find what they're looking for.
The dates, when people signed this book, it ranged like the 1850s. There was ones, April 1851. So it's interesting to know when this was signed, but also the handwriting here is beautiful. But it's very delicate because after you open it up, you can try that. It has to go up this way. So support that and then. Oh, I see. So let me just see if I can find a name and recognize even. But the handwriting is beautiful. And most of these dates seem to be 1851, which would have been about the time I think they arrived in England, that they were in England. Oh, this one is signed Edinburgh, in Scotland.
So this is a book, people, I know as a child, I used to have we call them autograph books where you would just get friends to write messages and sign. That's what this is. So there's various people, but it's very hard to read. Yeah, and it's very delicate. Yeah.
I wonder if could it be Harriet Martineau's letter? Or Harriet Martineau's writing? She was the celebrity British sociologist and writer who had the Crafts over to her cottage in Ambleside in the UK, in the Lakes District. But she's another fascinating character. Somebody mentioned earlier how the different secondary characters that are in this book and in the world of the Crafts, really, and they encountered so many amazing people. And this Harriet Martineau is another example of somebody who really was just enchanted by the Crafts. And she actually went into it like she knew that the Crafts were going to come and she was expecting to host them. She didn't have high hopes. She confided to one other friend that she didn't know exactly what to expect, but she especially fell in love with Ellen. And I think actually trying to sort of uncover Ellen Craft and her voice was really one of the most important things for me to be able to do. There has been some scholarship, there's different speculations about why Ellen Craft didn't speak as much, say, as William Craft did, or as William Wells Brown, who took them on the road. And some early scholarship was sort of suggesting that Ellen was silenced, but the more you get to know her and the more you get to read her, both her writing and accounts of conversations that she's had, things that she said, she was not a shrinking violet. She was a strong woman. So it becomes clearer and clearer that she's not speaking out of choice. And so one of the things I wanted to sort of figure out was what made her choose the silence and how did she use it as power? And I think that's something I've talked a lot about that with Miss Peggy Trotter Demon Priestley, another great granddaughter, who talks about it, the silence as part of a continuum of performance that Ellen Craft engages in.
I have a question. They obviously, it's in the book that they were not speaking. I mean, they couldn't write or read, but it's obvious from what you're saying, they learned to read and write. When and how did that come about?
So it came in bits. I think when they really actually, as soon as they arrive in Pennsylvania and they're with the Quakers, and that's actually a wonderful scene that they describe in their narrative. And I'll let you discover it yourselves, either through the 1860 narrative or through my my account of it. But they sit down for what they call like a bustin' supper. They have this great meal with the Quakers, and then after they finish everything, the Quakers ask, do you have any interest in learning how to write and read? And this is something that it's been a lifelong dream. I mean, Ellen Craft was living very close to what is now Wesleyan College in Macon, and her enslaving family members were involved, including her father, in bringing this institution of higher education for women to life. And she herself had been denied this. And she told Frederica Bremer, for example, later on, that's one of the reasons why she wanted to run, to be able to read and write. So as soon as they have the opportunity in Pennsylvania, they've eaten supper with the Quakers, they move everything out of the way, all the dishes and stuff, and they start with their slates. It's one of the first things that they do. And it's one of the reasons why I think it's so moving that now that there's this whole archive with all of their works and all of their writings, with their handwriting and their letters preserved, and that so many of their descendants are here too, as teachers and promoting education and activists. If they could only have seen this now.
Ilyon, I just want to say that a year and a half, maybe, in 2022, we had a chance, the three of us, with my husband, Leo, and Gail's partner, Jim, we went to London in October of 2022. And while there, we visited an area called Ockham, where they and saw the buildings where they learned to read and write, where they also taught sewing. Ellen taught sewing, and William taught woodworking, carpentry, and the area. So we had a picture before and a picture now. And you could see that, yes, there were changes that were made to the houses, but you could see the area where they were. Also the church, where I think 2 or 3 of their children were baptized.
Including our great-grandfather.
Including our great-grandfather, Charles Phillips Craft. He was the firstborn child. And also where they lived while they were in school. So it was a wonderful experience. We did a lot of other touring and saw the home where they lived. I forget the city. Hammersmith, where they lived, and where there's a blue plaque now on that building, on their house. And we took pictures in front of the house, and the renter came by at the same time, and we told her who we were and who the house was to us. And she said, "Oh, I want to take a picture with y'all." So we took a picture with him, but it was a wonderful experience, sort of walking the walk, if you will, during that time.
Amazing. Yeah.
And absolutely, we met. Julie Ellen had met on the previous year, several of the cousins, but on this trip, one of the cousins had us for lunch, and we met more. Well, she met more. We met them all at that time, and it was a really wonderful experience. And we have pictures of that meeting them, and they all were, except for one, I think, were about our age actually, and they when they reached adulthood is when most of them learned of their heritage, of being descendants of Ellen and William Craft, of the son, William Ivans, who's the son who stayed in England, did not come to the United States with the Ellen and William.
And I just add, the reason I think it was a different experience for them was that William Ivans Craft married someone who was white, and then they all did marry white. So they grew up essentially as white persons and in England, and they had not been to the States. And so although some of the older members of the family knew the story, that wasn't something they were passing down. They weren't necessarily proud of that initially. Now, our cousins that we met, who, as Vicki said, they're our generation, and they all embraced the story and embraced us. So, so now they're just as proud as we are, but it wasn't always like that for them. So.
How did they learn about their heritage? Was that relatively recent then?
So one of our cousins said that her mother knew. So some people in the family knew, her mother knew, but she didn't tell them. And so it was only when she was an adult, well into adulthood, I think she said she was in her 40s before her mother. So some knew, because actually, if you look at some of the pictures of their great grandfather, you can see that he's not white. Right, he was a person of color, as people say now. But yeah, so some people knew, but they just didn't talk about it. That's I don't know.
Yeah. So William Ivans, it's interesting because the current generation that we met, they're great grandchildren of Ellen and William, and we are great grandchildren of Ellen and William. So basically, it's we're of the same age, and so it's like, and so when we go to visit, I mean, like they're like about a year or 2 years older than us, but they're basically about the same age. It's pretty amazing to see that. But the reason why they now know the story is because they were because one of the cousins, his name is Martin, his wife was at a conference and she saw a plaque on the wall that talked about Ellen and William Craft. And that's how she was able to go back and tell them what she saw. But it was his mother who was hiding the truth and tried to burn up some of the pictures. So there was one who wanted to hide that story, wanted to hide that. But it's all out now because those folks over there are excited and they are very aggressive in learning what they can about their ancestors. And it's wonderful.
And there's
We
some
ha-
wonderful news. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go on. I was getting ready to say, because I don't want to keep people past their bedtime. And I did say 8 o'clock. We're a little bit past 8 o'clock. This has been such an engaging conversation. And I just wanted to get, if you have any closing words, Ilyon, in regards to anything, in regards to.
Well, I was going
Masterpiece
to,
of a book.
I think there's more research coming. I know, for example, William Ivins, there's much more to be told about him that the UK family members are uncovering, but really like what an incredible gift this is for the Kraft family, the descendants, to take these personal family treasures and to make them available and to entrust them and to Avery, which is an amazing place to visit. I mean, it makes this kind of new histories possible, and it's going to, your generosity will engender much more storytelling to come. And I just want to, as a scholar, and I want to thank you.
Ilyon, we welcome you to come back and visit us.
Yes, in person.
I would love
In
that.
person, in person.
I'd like to go ahead and thank you, Ilyon Wu, not only as a person, but for writing a masterpiece of
Thank
Master
you.
Slave Husband Wife. And also the Kraft family descendants, Julia Ellen Davis, Gail DaCosta, and Vicki Davis Williams. Thank you. And to everybody in the audience, to everybody in Zoom, I am sorry for the technical difficulties. But thank you for your patience and thank you for your attendance. And for people that watch this in the future, thank you for watching. And yes, and the Miss Ruth Rambo wants me to mention again, we're the Dr. Conseula Francis Reading Circle, and next month we are, I have to look it up myself. Let's see. Anyway, check our website, but it's the Davenports by Crystal Marquez on February the 15th. Everything will be on Zoom, no in person this time, no offer. We've been graced with the offer this month, but next time. And sometimes we do get the authors. So, check our website and find out what we're doing. We have a lot of cultural events going on in person and in Zoom. So again, thank you, everyone.